Governor Pritzker signs the Reproductive Health Act, and he's got lots of other bills to act on. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Governor Pritzker had one of those ceremonies this past week that we will quickly talk about, where he certainly was pleased with the accomplishment. Some people weren't so happy. That always happens in government. With me to talk about it today, Dave Dahl is back, a reporter on WTAX radio in Springfield. Welcome back, Dave.
As so often happens. Very thanks.
And Sam Dunklau is making his, I believe, first voyage on the show. Sam, welcome. He is a reporter with NPR Illinois here in Springfield.
Bernie, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, Sam, let's start with you. I talked as the show opened about the Reproductive Health Act. This is the bill that the governor signed in Chicago this past week to make sure that Illinois, as he says, is the most progressive state in the union, I think, on women's reproductive rights, including the right to abortion, even as other states are cutting back. Set the scene for us up in Chicago.
Right. And those are his words, the most progressive state in the nation in terms of reproductive health.
You were there.
That's right, I was. And in fact, there's a ballroom at the Chicago Cultural Center that's very, very large, the Grand Army of the Republic ballroom. Very, very ornately decorated. I've been in there a number of times, and it's completely empty, and yet it was filled with people for this particular signing. We had dozens of lawmakers, advocates that packed the sides. You know, at most of these press conferences and things like that, you'll have maybe a dozen. We're talking several dozen here. All of the seats that were put off to the side were reserved. Reporters crammed the area. It was really sort of shoulder to shoulder. And Pritzker gets up and starts talking about this law that has increased, or in some sense has changed who as well as how one can get an abortion. Talking additionally about the fact that our next door neighbors, Indiana, Missouri, have cut back or restricted access to the procedure, and then proceeds to introduce one after the other advocates who helped to craft the legislation, lawmakers who helped to write it and eventually get it to pass. And then he got to signing, one pen after another.
I was able to watch it by video, but he did say that this basically codifies what court decisions have said Illinois law is now. I know it gets rid of some older laws that are on the books in Illinois that have perhaps been blocked by courts, but that there's a worry that if Roe versus Wade was overturned at the national level, that abortion rights could be lost, and then some of these old laws in Illinois, like spousal approval, you have to get your husband's approval to get an abortion. That hasn't been active for years in Illinois, but that's something that was still on the books that's wiped off the books by this. So he's basically saying Illinois is going to remain this place where you can get a safe, legal abortion. And I know, as he said, abortion will happen, but it's going to be safe and legal in Illinois while other states cut back. Dave, your thoughts on, elections make a difference. So this governor, the last governor was pro-choice, but this is a strong pro-choice move in an era when a lot of states are going the other way.
It does go farther than House Bill 40, which Governor Rauner at the time signed after lying to the Cardinal about it. J.B. Pritzker said Illinois is going to be a destination for women who live in other states that have more restrictive abortion laws. And Peter Breen, who is a leading anti-abortion advocate, used to be in the legislature, and he's counsel to the Thomas More Society, said, this is terrible. Illinois is going to be a destination for women who live in states with more restrictive laws. So the governor, what the governor said would be a good thing was exactly what Mr. Breen said would be a bad thing. And the advocates say it's about trusting women. It's about letting a woman be in charge of her own reproductive health. And I interviewed Kelly Cassidy about this. She's the sponsor in the House of the bill, the Reproductive Health Act, and said that the other side has, an argument that is easy to say and easy to remember. A heartbeat's a baby. A heartbeat's a life. Mm-hmm. And when you have an abortion, you're violating the rights of that baby. And I honed in on violating the baby's rights, that the baby, unborn baby, has the same rights as the mother-to-be. And finally she said, I fundamentally disagree with that.
Right, and I think the legislation basically says that it's the mother that has the rights until the baby is born, which of course advocates of who are opposed to abortion clearly view Illinois as doing something bad here, whereas advocates of, as they say, women's health are very happy that people will have the freedom to do what they say will happen anyway in back alleys if it's not legal.
RHA, babies don't have the rights.
Yeah, Sam, I think you went to the little, did you go to the press conference afterwards
right.
with the Peter Breen and other opponents? And the thing about the abortion issue is people are very passionate in their beliefs on both sides of this, and I assume that was reflected there.
Yes, yeah. A few of the protesters that had come up had said, and I'm giving you back their words, not mine, to say, I'll be damned if you tell me that this thing that's growing inside her mother's womb is not a living, breathing child. Another protester had said, we're going to continue to fight against what is clearly the wrong tide for the state of Illinois. Although opponents have made the argument with this particular piece of legislation that a woman could get an abortion now up to the third trimester in what's called post-viability. Viability being an abortion that takes place 24 weeks after gestation. But in reading the bill, from what I had seen, a doctor is only allowed to perform an abortion post-viability if it's necessary for the health of the mother. And the health reasons that are specified in the law, things like mental health, physical health, familial health, that is to say, what was passed down, those things were already in statute previously. So a lot of the abortion protections that were already in statute remain to be so. But still, opponents clearly see this as something that's quite expansive.
Right, and certainly on the debate on the floor, which lasted, what, a couple hours, 2.5 hours, I think,
and
brought up a lot of these same issues where, who's going to make that decision? What is the health of the mother? If it's mental health, is it, if you don't want to? And then advocates for abortion were saying, nobody takes this lightly. You're not going to see a healthy baby born or near birth, and then a mother saying, oh, I just don't want it. That does not happen. I don't know, but the arguments on both sides are like that, very emotional.
Well, and getting back to the heartbeat issue, they say, the abortion advocates say, by the time you even know you're pregnant, you've got the heartbeat. And so these heartbeat bills would pretty much outlaw all abortions.
Right, that's some of the states are saying, at 6 weeks you can't have an abortion if there's a heartbeat. And I know I heard it reported in the news, at least, that a lot of people haven't realized that they are pregnant at that time. So it'll be a big test, and it's part of kind of the next election, but elections in Illinois matter. We have a Democratic legislature and a governor who's very pro-choice on this issue, and that was it. I did this show last week. I did not mention it had just happened that Bishop Paprocki of Springfield Catholic Diocese put a ban on communion for House Speaker Michael Madigan and Senate President John Cullerton because they supported this bill, also other Catholic politicians. I think Cullerton's spokesman has said he doesn't take communion or go to church in Springfield. Madigan apparently used to go to church more in Chicago and doesn't perhaps do that these days. And Cardinal Supich of the Chicago Archdiocese, who oversees, he's a cardinal, so he's certainly a bigger deal in the Catholic Church than Bishop Paprocki, but basically said it's up to the local bishop, but I believe that communion is something that is good for the teaching of morals. In other words, basically saying let's not put restrictions on, but Paprocki and his predecessor in Springfield has had a similar ban on Springfield resident Dick Durbin taking communion for, I think it's more than 15 years. I've done a couple stories on it over time, and he goes to church in Chicago or out of town when he goes to church. Dave, any thoughts on this one?
I wonder where it would stop or should stop if Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton, I mean, that's purely symbolic. Neither of those gentlemen worship in Springfield. Why not deny communion to anybody who's had an abortion? Why not deny communion to anybody who's performed an abortion? I think those are valid questions, and I'm not sure if the bishop has the answer. I am sure that the bishop has the answer.
Well, I know the bishop, I've heard some interviews with him, and I know he talks about what is clearly a moral wrong, et cetera, but he has been more out there than certainly some folks. We have a strong Catholic community in Springfield, but he, for example, had like an exorcism at the church when there was I think it was a bill signing that after Pat Quinn had approved same-sex civil unions. I can't remember if it was civil unions or same-sex marriage, but again, the bishop was opposed to that. It's now the law of the land also, and so on we go.
Cullerton and Madigan's people put out statements saying, look, this bill is important. It's about women's health, and it's more important than what a bishop says about us personally and whether we can have communion.
Well, Illinois is solidly in the pro-choice line now, and we'll see if that has any ramifications in the next election, because we talk about those things too on this program. But every 2 years, members of the House get elected, so we'll see what happens in the 2020 election. As also, we expect President Trump to be on the ballot, and a lot of the people who like President Trump like the fact that he's putting conservative judges on the Supreme Court and on federal district courts who may eat away at abortion rights in the country, because he has said he would do that. So we'll see what happens. There's been some movement on AFSCME, the largest state employee union, with a lot of people who live in and around Springfield who work for that. We've got, I think it's 40,000 state employees work for AFSCME. And Sam, the AFSCME members are due to get their step raises sometime by the end of September, according to the union. Step raises that they didn't get all during the tenure of former Governor Rauner.
Right, and it's of no surprise that many viewed the Rauner administration as having a crusade against union employees, particularly those in AFSCME. That's what drew sort of the most public attention. I had covered this last year at the Capitol, and folks like AFSCME Council 31 Executive Roberta Lynch and Susana Mendoza were at the Capitol quite regularly as session was concluding and throughout the summer months, lobbying the Rauner administration constantly to pay employees their step increases. They said so loudly, they said so proudly. It was something that was held, as you had mentioned, since 2015. What did happen last year in the state budget was that those same employees were granted back pay, in some instances as far back as 2011. And so fast forward to 2018, and now you've got these folks who were paid back pay that they were owed years ago, all of a sudden now getting paid. And so now we've got the next thing coming in, this step increases that really the AFSCME as well as other state employees negotiate with the state in order to keep their standard of living, their pay up to a certain level as inflation increases, as other things like that. Pritzker has indicated that he's willing to strike this deal and this bargain, and of course he's not Rauner. He didn't take a court to the Supreme Court.
He says they're an essential part of things instead of
and he also
basically the problem with the state, which Governor Rauner talked about, government union bosses a lot.
And if I may, he also didn't take a case to the Supreme Court involving AFSCME Council 31 that was so covered.
Yeah, so it is, again, the election has made a difference here, Dave, and we were just reading, there is a deal struck with AFSCME members on a contract that had expired in 2015.
Right at the end of session.
Right at the end of session, we were reading Capitol Facts just before we started the show and saw that I think over a period of years, the average AFSCME worker will get about $7,000 more in annual pay over a period of the contract over a few years. So
yeah, if I'm selling bass boats or a big TV or home improvement, I'm participating in business. Folks have money to spend.
It is that kind of thing. Well, one other issue that is sitting out there is the capital plan that the legislature passed in that flurry of activity at the end of May and just the first couple of days of June. It's a $45 billion capital plan. We know that it has, for example, I think it's more than $120 million to fix and get use again out of the state armory in Springfield, which is across the street from the state capitol. There's another, I think, $120 million or so for railroad improvement projects through the city of Springfield. And then there are some, obviously a big bill like this where members had their say. We know that, for example, Andy Menard, state senator, got $500,000, I think it was $500 or $300 for improvements in just one ward in Springfield, Ward 3, because he says that part of town has, a poor section of town has not adequately been taken care of over the years. Also, the alderman who runs that is Doris Turner, who happens to be the Democratic county chair of Sangamon County. So
Yeah,
there are things
cynical-
in the bill that there's a lot of money to be thrown around here with the increase in the gasoline tax, increase in cigarette taxes. And Dave, you did get Republican support on it, though.
Some, yes, and now comes word that the Republicans who don't like the other Republicans think it's a bad deal and a waste of money, et cetera. And these are the people that want to kick Chicago out of Illinois.
Yeah.
And they're unhappy with Durkin's leadership in the House minority and unhappy with some of their fellow Republicans who voted for it.
Yeah.
But it's big, partly because they only do it once every 10 years. Perhaps if there were an ongoing plan or some kind of rolling appropriations for it, they wouldn't have to do $1 zillion every 10 years.
Well, I do think the gasoline tax is going to be indexed to inflation now. Is that correct?
That's what I understand,
Yeah,
yes.
because there was discussion of this. Senator Sandoval in the Senate was talking about this. We won't have to come back all the time. So we'll see if this creates a more sustainable plan, because what has taken over recent years, let's see, Jim Thompson did a lot of building, George Ryan did, but then Blagojevich had no relationship with the legislature, so they wouldn't do it with him because nobody trusted where the money would go. Then Pat Quinn did a plan 10 years ago, but then
And that
Governor
never got
Rauner,
finished. That never got finished, did it?
I think it was cut short. I know Governor Pritzker talks about that a lot, that they didn't spend all the money they were going to spend.
Well, we'll see if we really have smooth roads to drive on and fixed up public buildings, or if it's just going to be a lot of chocolate stars, which seem to attract attention.
Yeah, Dave, you talked about the Republicans who are unhappy, some with their own party. There's 8 Republican state representatives wrote something at the Sun-Times in Chicago. Headline was, "Our own Republican Party leaders failed the taxpayers of Illinois." This is at least part of this group has the resolution that Chicago should be its own state. Brad Hellbrook, Republican representative of Shelbyville, is kind of the leader of this group. And they say we didn't need all the taxes, and we should do more cuts. And so you do have this difference of opinion, and yet Leader Durkin, Jim Durkin, the leader of the Republicans in the House, made a last-minute deal with Governor Pritzker to get some business incentives included in the budget, including doing away with the franchise tax, which I think is going to save business $200 million a year. And so you've got your top-level Republicans like Jim Durkin and Bill Brady, the leader of Senate Republicans, who's from Bloomington and represents part of Springfield, saying, we know we're in the severe minority, but we were able to get something out of this. So there's a bipartisanship showing there.
That was not showing on, say, the Reproductive Health Act or the minimum wage or some of the other things where the governor only claimed bipartisanship. I think Durkin in the House and Brady in the Senate stepped up and made it a true bipartisan bill. And I think the people who don't like Leader Durkin as leader probably think that there's no such thing as a moderate Republican anymore, and that we should be at one extreme or the other. And I think in Illinois, if you're extreme to the right, good luck, because you're going to need, there aren't enough extreme Republicans to really carry anything right now in Illinois. Yeah. They're going to need help.
But we hear some stuff. Certainly the arguments that are made and the anti-tax arguments are being carried by that bunch and some others. On the other hand, again, even the State Chamber of Commerce was for the construction plan.
The gas tax.
The gas tax part of it. So one of the big ideas that's still out there, and one of the things the legislature did that's part of the accomplishments of Governor Pritzker, is to pass a constitutional amendment which goes to the voters next November of 2020, asking for Illinois to not necessarily be on a flat income tax, but to be able to go to a graduated income tax.
That's another partisan vote.
It was no Republicans on that one. Sam, there's Ideas Illinois is run by Greg Bays. He used to head the Illinois Manufacturers Association, and they have a kind of a polling subset that grew out of IMA called We Ask America. There was a poll done. They say that support for the graduated tax has slipped to 51%, down from 59% in February. Although I did notice that one of the questions that was asked is, at least to some recipients of that poll, is, would the money that you're giving to this, or would passing a graduated income tax just be a blank check for Springfield politicians? So we're going to just see a lot of fighting about this for the next year until November of 2020.
Yeah, we sure will. And you had mentioned Greg Bays. The way that I know that he came from the IMA is that the Greg Bays building is the IMA's building in downtown Springfield, if you've ever walked by there. On this poll, I took a look at the poll memo myself, and they interviewed about 800 people, in some instances over the phone, in some instances not. And the margin of error that they came out with was about 3.5%. And I'll get a little statistical. I mean, when you're talking about a sample that size and you've got a margin of error that's at about that, that's not excellent, but it's not bad either. There are certainly the fact that you can't, of course, interview everybody, but indicating that you have a margin of error of that particular level might indicate that there might be some issues with that. Bernie, you had mentioned a question that kind of perked your ears up, but I had noticed that some data in that poll had indicated they had asked a question that had highlighted the fact that 31% of participants agree that the graduate income tax is a jobs tax, while their own data had also said that 34% disagreed with that, that it's not a jobs tax. Additionally, 46%, by their own data, had said that changing Illinois' income tax structure was a good thing. But of course, these are things that you don't highlight when your ID is Illinois.
Yeah, and the flat tax, I might point out, the legislature can raise that or lower it anytime they want.
Even now.
Even now.
Right.
So it's the blank check argument, I think, is, I'm not sure how it's more of a blank check than the system we have now.
Okay, and while we mentioned this
blanker check.
Ideas Illinois, there's another group that's, you can call them dark money groups because they don't have to disclose their donors, but it's called Think Big Illinois, and we know that Governor Pritzker is one of the donors to that. They are arguing that it's a fair tax, not a jobs tax, and that only under the rates passed by the legislature this year, only the top 3% of earners in Illinois would pay more. Everybody else would pay the same or less. That's their argument. The argument against is, oh no, they won't make enough money that way, and some rich people will leave, and they'll have to raise taxes on everybody and hurt the middle class. But the governor says that's not true, so we're going to hear this. And I'm guessing that if Governor Pritzker, who is a billionaire like 3 times over, is giving more money to Think Big Illinois, we're going to hear a lot of ads on that side, and it's going to be an airwaves battle for the next year and a half. We'll see where it goes. It's going to be a lot of talk. We've been talking a little today about Governor Rauner and some of what happened in the past 4 years versus this, when a lot of things kind of slowed down. One of the things that slowed down in the past was the Illinois State Museum, closed for 9 months, which the Governor Rauner had said was to save money, although most of the staff, except the non-union leaders, kept working behind the locked doors. It was very weird and interesting, and of course there's a collection to take care of, but they almost lost their accreditation. Anyway, Bonnie Stiles left as director at that time, replaced by Michael Wyant. Then recently there's been an interim director, Robert Sill, but now there has just been an announcement this past week that there's a new director of the State Museum named Cinnamon Catlin-Legutko, who has run, if that's how to pronounce it.
I believe it's Legutko.
Legutko, thank you.
All I can think of is that Neil Young song.
Oh.
Cinnamon Girl.
Ah, thank you. And she has run the Abbey Museum in Bar Harbor, Maine, dealing with, I think, Maine's Native American history, that kind of thing. So things may be getting back to normal. There is now a $5 charge for most people to get into the State Museum. Dave, that was a very interesting episode, and people are now complaining that Illinois is just back to taxing and spending. On the other hand, things like the State Museum are operating.
It's important, and having a user fee, I think should appease some of the people who don't like the taxing and spending. And you got, well, I don't wonder what was in Governor Rauner's head about it, but he was, dead set to close the museum. And one of the Republican lawmakers told me, well, it's, or no, I was thinking of something else. He said it's the law we have to have a state fair, and I said it's also the law you've got to pay for schools. But in any event, the governor at that time, Governor Rauner, said we don't have the money to fund the State Museum, and I thought, why single that out as something in these years, plural, without a budget? That's one of the things that really has to take the hit.
Yeah, and one of the more interesting times in the Rauner administration was when the announcement was made they were reopening the museum, and Governor Rauner showed up and got a little bit of a talking to from an elderly gentleman who was a museum person, I think, from the U of I. Who?
What did you tell him?
what did he
Oh,
tell?
this is a different elderly gentleman.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, thank you very much. No. But it was interesting. He closed it and then he showed up to laud its opening. But we have moved on. There is one of the other big issues out there where there are discussions all over the state about where to put casinos, including in the city of Chicago. The big gambling bill that allows sports betting and more positions at gambling positions on riverboats and in racetracks and in bars and restaurants and 6 casinos. And there's also some more money for fighting addiction, a gambling addiction, which could happen. Sam, I guess the governor will have to just speculate on where he might sign the bill for gambling expansion, then see how we deal with
You'd
the
take
problems.
bets on it.
Right. In fact, you could. We're not sure, but we know that places like Rockford, as well as certainly the city of Chicago, want him to get moving on that sooner than later. And I mentioned Rockford because you've heard complaints from the city of Rockford about the fact that the Ho-Chunk Nation, just across the border in Wisconsin, is attempting to build a casino. So the sooner they can get the Illinois casino up, the more that they could attract. You had mentioned positions. The state of Illinois is practically doubling its positions, but has not funded gambling addiction for quite a while. There's about $7 million worth of gambling addiction that's included in this bill. The only trouble is we don't know how many people suffer from gambling addiction. There's a study that's going to be done, but that hasn't been done in 3 decades. I would wonder where exactly you would spend that money if you don't really know how many people you need to help.
Well, it sounds like they will gear up and try to get that stuff done because it's a continuing concern. And I'm old enough to remember when the only legal gambling in Illinois was scratch-off lottery tickets when they first got allowed, I think under Governor Walker.
74.
So there you go. Well, that does it for today. We will continue to watch. We'll just guess that the governor will be signing maybe a big bill a week or something, but we'll find out. With that, Dave Dahl, thanks for your help. Sam Dunklau, welcome again, and thank you for your help. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.